Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me here today. My name is Tom Godden. I'm an executive in residence with AWS. Our executive in residence team is a team of former executives who help organizations with their digital transformation, their cloud transformation, their AI transformation. And today we're going to talk about data strategy in the era of agentic AI. And I'm thrilled to share this using Formula One as a backdrop. Now, hopefully we got some Formula One fans here in the audience. I myself am a huge Formula One fan, but there's so much that we can learn from them where victories come down to milliseconds. But what if we find a way to apply some of the same precision, some of the same thinking to the way that we operate in the businesses that we have? You know, interestingly, Formula One champions are made not just by the drivers, but by data. And behind those engines lies that invisible battle, all that information. Each car captures over 1 million data points per second. It's amazing. Pit crews take this flood of information and transform it into split-second strategic decisions. And fans, well, we get to see the spectacle. We get to see the excitement. But in our own businesses, unlike Formula One, many businesses fail to extract the value that they want. Gartner warns us that 80% of data governance initiatives will fail by 2027. Wow. Expensive data lakes sit underutilized. But what if we've been approaching data strategy the wrong way? You know, we celebrate collecting petabytes while customers wait for actual solutions. Our massive platforms aren't delivering what truly matters at times. We're struggling, but Formula One, well, it can show us a better way. But here's the sobering stat. 99% of organizations invest in data. Who's the 1% that aren't, first of all? But only 29% are seeing meaningful business value from those investments. We're all chasing this data, but we're not getting there. The big question then is, well, what do we do with agentic AI? It's changing everything. It's like when Formula One teams completely redesign their car. It isn't just an extension of traditional AI. It's going to force us to fundamentally think about things different. The approach that we have will be different. You know, we've seen data strategy evolve. You know, BI gave us reports, big data, we built lots of those data lakes. Generative AI built the content, but now that fourth era has emerged, agentic AI, so we can take autonomous action. You know, your data lakes now are those training grounds, your pipelines now feed those autonomous agents. So today's session, I'm going to talk about a data framework, not just identify the problem. You'll gain some practical tools to evaluate your strategy, to help transform your governance, and we'll connect it all together, hopefully, at the end. So let's go through it. The promise is easy, but let's talk about how we deliver them with a proven framework. This is not just a series of scattered tactics, but a real system and a way to think of it. So we're going to start with Reimagine. We're going to challenge some assumptions that we've all held on why data matters. Then we're going to rewire. We're going to talk about our organizations and how we might need to think of things different. And finally, we're going to realize it. So how do we actually deliver on those promises? Well, we need a solid foundation. We need to focus on something that can help us build and create value. But this means reimagining everything. How do you manage it? How do you extract value from it? Most companies, and I was this way, you know, chase technology or these vanity metrics on these large data lakes instead of the value. So let's look at a few lessons. We'll start with the lesson from Formula One. Every gram on the car matters. If you add a new sensor, something needs to come off. Engineers are always asking, is this data providing me value? Is this sensor helping me? If it's not, it needs to leave. Now, again, most organizations, and I was this way, you know, collected a lot of that data, even though we didn't necessarily, you know, need it. It means that every data point must enhance customer decisions. Just like Formula One sensors and Formula One cars need to win races. You know, comes down to milliseconds in Formula One. Just 0.8 seconds separated the first car from the last car in the race in Austria. But in business, we're struggling with some of this. So here's an uncomfortable truth. Sophisticated infrastructure doesn't always create value. They're often disconnected from customer decisions. But in business, we need to have that value that comes out of it. But unfortunately, another uncomfortable truth, sophisticated infrastructure doesn't always create what we need. The critical problem is domain experts know exactly which decisions drive business outcomes. And data teams are building those sophisticated solutions. But without a shared language for everyone to communicate, even great work, well, falls by the wayside. So success comes from embedding teams together that get the technologists with the business domain owners. And every investment, I suggest, should pass these three questions. One, does it drive measurable business impact, not just technical achievement? Two, does it prevent over-engineering when simpler solutions exist? Maybe your architects are better than mine. But my guys just would love building a Gordian knot solution. And we need to prioritize speed. You know, Jeff Bezos has a great quote, the only thing your competition cannot equal is you being first. Lonely Planet exemplifies this customer-first data strategy and how they think about it. They started with their customers' actual needs, personalized recommendation on specific contexts. And rather than leading with the technology, they reimagined how they could better serve their constituents. As we move on, do you ever wonder what drivers are staring at in those screens as they sit in their cars before they leave the garage? It's their custom lap analysis showing exactly where they gained or lost time on the track. Every turn is mapped against one of their competitors, color-coded for instant clarity. No overwhelming dashboards, just what they need to go faster for the next lap. This focused clarity is what we need. We need this focus to understand that we need to strategically curate data, not everything that ultimately matters. You see, in Formula One, you know, it was interesting. When I was doing this, I had a long conversation with one of the race strategists at Formula One. Pit stops went from 67 seconds to 1.8 seconds over the last decade. Now, they stopped refueling the cars, so that actually cut down on the time. But the gain was enormous, and how they did that is they mapped out every move, every step, every process that they went through to be able to understand and gather the specific data that they needed to answer the question. You see, the thing is, the volume fallacy, we chase more data often, those big data metrics. I worked at a genomics company. I was proud. I was like, we had 100 petabytes of data. Who cares how much data we have? It's the value we need to get out of it. And here's where agentic AI changes everything. It unlocks that 90% of untapped data. That unstructured data, that email, the notes, the documents now directly need to shape the decisions. No more forcing that structure on everything. We need multiple agents orchestrated to go after that unstructured data. You see, agentic AI, well, it's fundamentally different. It sees how your data connects. One customer complaint becomes more powerful when I understand it's always new customers who return this. It's customers in Texas that return this. It's customers who also bought something else. That context in agentic AI helps us manage and control those agents and how they're going to operate. You know, Formula One teaches us something really powerful. You know, the driver, well, they get just those 8 numbers on how to the lap go faster. The engineer might get 200. What we need to be doing is customizing the data for the use of the people that have it. You know, unfortunately, the result is most managers, 1 out of 6, trust their data enough to use it for decisions. The other 5 do not. So the move to data products and having that data ownership is critically important. But let's talk for just a second what we mean by data products. They're not just raw information. They're purpose-built data assets designed for specific needs. They have a clear owner, someone who's accountable for quality throughout the entire life cycle, but it goes beyond that. They're also accountable for making sure people can get value out of that data. They're obsessed with it. Now, one of the mistakes I see organizations make when they start out on their data strategy, and I did this, is we try to boil the ocean. We're like, I'm going to clean up all of my data. I'm going to get everything solved. That's a great way to spend $50 million and get fired. Instead, find a business use case, a problem that needs to be solved, and then go back to that problem that needs to be solved and create the data assets that you need to solve it, and then move on to the next one. You know, agentic and generative AI is demanding that we have the why behind the what. You know, we need to understand why things happen, not just record what happened. You know, strategic data curation and action, you know, BMW, a great customer of ours, is zeroing in on only the most valuable data in their manufacturing assets. And instead of measuring everything, they identified exactly which sensors impact quality. Their focus then allowed them to deliver value on that and not get distracted by the broader set of data. All too often, we wind up getting distracted by that. We need that hyper focus that data products will give us. And now that we have reset our focus on what matters, well, we need to go back to Formula One. It teaches us a crucial lesson. The fastest car means nothing without the coordinated team behind it. You know, we need to have that organization. We need to reset our focus on what matters. We have the data products, we have the strategic curation, but we need the team. Like that 1.8 second pit stop. Every handoff is engineered. Every pathway needs to be clear. Companies need to focus on that value. Data lakes need to break down these barriers. But how? How do we get to that point? How do we evolve? You see, Ferrari's tire specialist, well, they're not back at the factory. He's trackside where it matters. The fuel strategist hears everything that the driver complaint has in real time. Each expert is positioned where their decisions will create immediate impact. This proximity principle is crucial to ensuring that we can get the context and the understanding of this data in this new era. But because proximity without the right structure, well, it's kind of like having trackside experts who can't communicate with the pit crew, your data strategy will face the same truth. You need skilled people in the right places, and the best platforms, well, they become paperweights if you can't have teams using them effectively. Anyone can buy the technology, but it's the people that are going to matter. Here's one uncomfortable truth about data transformations. Focusing on the technology instead of the people together is like trying to take a Formula One car and drive it on a dirt track. Now, someone actually pointed out to me that Red Bull did this back in Australia a couple years ago. But the point is, we need to combine the greatest technology in the world, Formula One cars, with the greatest people in the world in order to succeed. And the research backs this up. For 5 straight years, culture beats technology as a roadblock. See, leaders preach these data-driven decisions, but often they rely on their gut to do things. And those data experts, we locked them away, I don't know, somewhere back over, I don't know where they went. But the point is, they're not out there in front. They're not with your people on this. So where should we exactly embed these teams? I get this question all the time. Should I centralize my teams or decentralize? The answer is you should do both. You know, centralized makes a lot of sense to have control, but we lose context on these things. And so the advice I generally give to people is centralize the things that will make you go faster. Everything else, decentralize it. Move it out as close to the opportunity and the need that you have. But now we have this problem. We have these people with data hoarding. You know, people treat that data like their personal treasure. They believe that secrecy gives them the power, you know, to control this. You know, data has that value. We need to help them go back on this and to start sharing this information. It isn't malicious. People fear that you will misuse their data. So we need to transform this culture. We need to understand their concerns. We need to build those secure platforms that people trust and lead by example on the top. It is a simple process, but we need to help the people go through it. We need to fix that decision distance we talked about with a 3-team structure that puts decisions and expertise together. We need platform teams to provide tools and standards that enable rather than control. And then we have product teams that we've embedded with sales, marketing, operations that are building those data assets and own those data assets. And then we have the data users. So my guidance is decentralize your teams by default. Centralize only what speeds you up. Flip the concept on the data hoarding from automatic sharing. Everything's open. Start with that as the default. Move your data engineers into the business unit and drive this through that cultural repetition and drive inside the organization. You see, Ferrari uses identical telemetry standards whether the data goes to the pit or the factory. Every team member knows exactly what tire temperature means. There's no confusion. These standards enable those split-second decisions as the car's racing around the track. This is what enabling governance looks like. Standards that accelerate, not restrict people from doing. Governed by enabling, not by restricting. It transforms how we think and operate. Think of Formula One safety cars. They don't stop the race, they guide the drivers through the race safely. Great governance works the same way. Managing risk while accelerating value. Most companies do the opposite, creating roadblocks and holding things back, and I understand that. But the majority of the data and information can be free. I know AI governance feels like an impossible puzzle. 92% of agentic AI users worry about data quality and governance issues. Half of data leaders say poor quality blocks their AI implementation. You're not behind. Everyone's struggling with this. Everyone's working their way through this. So what do? Well, unfortunately, a lot of times companies panic and they lock everything down. I did. But here's the irony. Those strict controls actually create the problems they're meant to prevent. Teams go around them. Shadow IT flourishes. When official channels are too restrictive, people get creative. The tighter you grip, the less control you have. So let's talk about a better way. Minimally viable governance. Think guardrails, not roadblocks. Like Formula One's track lines, we're going to define clear limits. Accepting some visible risk actually reduces your real risk exposure. When teams work within systems instead of around them, we have more success. Traditional governance always asks, are we complying? Context engineering asks, are we enabling better decisions? Instead of documenting after creation, we need to build that context into our systems. That context travels with that data. Business meeting follows that information everywhere. This transforms metadata from passive information to something that drives this. You see, most data requests should be auto-approved. Come up with a classification system. This is a good one. You can come up with your own. But the vast majority of your data should be open. Yes, some of it is a little tighter. And yeah, guys, I get it. I've worked in a healthcare life sciences company. Some gets locked down, but the vast majority we need to enable and make it available for our people. You see, that smart classification will unlock something bigger. We're going to be able to go after lineage and understand that. Forget those audit trails and those dusty compliance docs. Agentic AI needs real-time transparency, knowing exactly where that data came from in the context and the relationship of that data. What data shaped it. Without that clarity, well, we're flying blind. And in this new era, God, that's the last thing we can do. So enabling governance, well, it requires more than processes. Teams need those clear values. When people know the organizational values, they can act without constant approval. At Amazon, we love our leadership principles. They provide a framework to empower people, to be creative, to move fast, to make decisions on their own. Now, our approach, we've distilled this down into 8 essential tenets that we think make a lot of sense. The foundation, customer value, drives all investment. Quality, measured at the point of impact. We want to manage the flow, the distance from the information, the execution, the clear ownership through that monitoring. And together, these 8 principles transform data chaos into competitive advantage. You see, again, traditional governance restricts. We want to enable. Those standards will help eliminate the confusion and enable those split-second decisions so we can empower those people that we just decentralized and moved out across the organization. We need to empower those people so they don't work around this. So now that we've built a solid foundation through Reimagine and we've organized our teams through Rewire, But the first two steps mean nothing without that measurable business impact. And now is a time to realize how we go about doing that, how we bring that dynamic data into a living strategy. And let's dive into how we go about doing that. And we'll go back to Formula One. Race day is where champions prove themselves. This is the moment of truth. Even the fastest car without a perfect strategy needs flawless execution to win. So let's talk about how we build this organization, how we ultimately get to this value. Ferrari doesn't stick to a pre-race strategy when conditions change mid-race. Unexpected rain changes things, a safety car changes things. They adapt that strategy based upon what's happening now rather than what they planned. And your quarterly planning approach can't respond to those quick market dynamics and changes. Your data strategy must have the same adaptability. We need to have dynamic data. We cannot have static repositories. Ferrari's real-time adjustments are what we need to go after. After each event, they refine their systems based upon what they learned, creating those rapid feedback loops for their data. Your data strategy needs this same evolution where you're obsessed about real-time data. That dynamic data, approach, is something that agentic AI demands, not periodic refreshes like traditional systems. Real time means capturing every interaction as it happens. Forget batch processing. If you have batch processing, obsess about getting rid of them. Like Formula One telemetry, adjusting mid-race, every data point we need to be focused on how it can get us to value. You see, Formula One, again, millions of data points per second. It's how modern races are won. Instant feedback, though, is what enables them to make those adjustments, and your business needs that same velocity. Again, obsess over how we can eliminate those batch processing models, transform speed into a competitive advantage with a couple of these steps. First, audit the decision delays. Where are those data bottlenecks? Relentlessly eliminate them. Select 2 or 3 high-impact decisions needing immediate acceleration, go after them. And then replace the batch reports. Guys, replace the batch processing. We need fast data so we can have fast decisions. You see, dynamic data means, capturing every interaction as it happens. But we need to reduce the time between data creation and decisive action. We need to replace those weekly reports with real-time dashboards, and speed becomes that sustainable advantage. You see, dynamic data, might be easy to do, but it's important to think of how we do this in a broader strategy context. Ferrari doesn't wait till next season to improve their car. Between practice and qualifying, they make adjustments based upon the data they have. We need to have real-time flowing data so we can do this the same. Data needs to be evolving and is a regular practice. And as part of that, our data strategy, it can't be a document. It's what you do every day, just like Ferrari's constant refinement. Picture those Formula One teams huddled around screens, adjusting data strategy. Your approach needs that same real-time flexibility, and success comes from constant testing and learning on this. You see, strategy documents, I wrote lots of them, might be less important than we actually thought. McKinsey found that 21% of the top performers credit a strategy document for their success. I don't know if McKinsey wrote the strategy document. What actually works? Treating strategy as a daily practice. The best companies embed that strategic thinking in every decision they make. You see, these things, they're not minor issues that we deal with. They're existential threats to your data strategy. If you see these signs, pause your new investments and fix these underlying problems. When we wind up relying on our gut because we're struggling with these things, we're making bad decisions. Strategy isn't that once-a-year practice. It's something like the Formula One cars. We need to do every lap, every race, continuously. Your daily decisions should advance revenue decisions. We need to test those strategic assumptions by having that access to that real-time data. So, we've laid out a playbook. It's time to talk a little bit about the foundation that'll deliver your freedom to invent. AWS provides a proven data infrastructure that scales without limits while optimizing that value. Purpose-built databases and processing engines create trusted data that we need to be able to do this. So now we have the complete playbook: reimagine, rewire, realize. The question isn't whether or not you need to transform, it's how fast you can move to do this. So start by reimagining your foundation through your customer eyes and treating data as products. Focus on strategic curation over volume. Rewire with a people-powered centric organization. And then treat strategy as an ongoing practice. You know, we all heard the quote, data is like oil. No, it isn't. Data is like oxygen. It's even more important. Companies can run without fuel, but you can't run without oxygen. Agentic AI winners will treat data as vital to their organization. I want to thank you guys very much for your time and your attention here today.